Hey guys, welcome back to Home Build, and in this episode we are going to be finalising the fuel system and the wiring in the back end of Harry. Okay guys, so last week you saw me make this panel. I've actually, as you saw, I painted it. I've just put it back in and connected it all up. So I have my bulkhead connectors coming from my ECU here that my engine can now just plug straight into. That's nice and easy. I was going to mount my fuel pressure regulator here. Some people showed concern about that it's fuel next to electrical. There's like heaps of things in this engine bay. These are watertight, and really I'm not concerned about that at all. If I get a leak, it's going to be an issue no matter what, more than likely going on to dripping down into hot exhausts that are below. So that's not really the reason, but what I'm going to do, just for plumbing issues, I'm probably going to mount the fuel pressure regulator back over in the middle, back over here somewhere. So what I'm going to do on here is I've got my 3 relays that I'm going to be mounting in the engine bay. I'm going to mount them up here, so it's time to start wiring these. Now I've gone through and had a look at the Link ECU wiring specifications. They give you a full layout of sort of how to wire it all up. I have realised that I need 2 more wires coming out of the ECU, or 1 wire really coming out of the ECU back up through the loom, so I knew that was going to happen. But I sort of did a bit of a sketch here of what I'm going to be doing to connect it all up. It probably looks like a lot of scribbles, but basically power will come into one of the relays. That relay will then turn on the other 2. 2 of these relays are for the coil packs themselves, so one for the top layer of coil packs, one for the bottom layer of coil packs. The other one is sort of the main relay to switch on the ECU, to switch on, and also that's the one that powers the injectors, which don't take a lot of power, things like that. So that's my basic setup. So now it's time to sort of mount this up and start sort of tackling my wiring and see if I can get this all to flow the way it's supposed to. Alright, phase 1 is done. I've mounted them, that's the easy bit. I used riv nuts. I would prefer normally to weld in captive nuts, but I've already painted up this panel. I don't want to pull it out and weld it up and bubble all the paint and have to paint it again. So riv nuts will be more than enough for what I'm using here. So now it's time to go through and start making heads or tails of this wiring. I'm going to go through now and I'll probably number them 1, 2 and 3, and they'll all go through these fuses over here. I'm going to use the fuse panel that was for the rear of the car originally. This was for things like the rear window heater and warm-up regulator. There was some stuff for the CIS, but I'm not using any of that anymore. I don't use the rear window defroster anymore. I didn't connect that up in the car because the defroster lines were all perished anyway. So I'm using that now to be the fuses for this whole rear end, so it should all be nice and neat and tidy once I get it all wired in. So there was an extra splice I had to do down here to splice power through to the ECU, because I sort of spent all that time doing the connections from the ECU, but I didn't actually do anything to it. So I just to make sure I got it actually connected up so that this is actually going to get some power to it. That's been done now, so now I need to go through and just do a little bit more tidying up in the engine bay, and then the wiring side is sorted for now. Okay, so like everything on this build, that took much longer than I hoped it would. But I think I've got it pretty well sorted now. So I have my relays in. They are now connected through to the fuse box here, this little fuse panel. So they should be running fuse power with relays to my injectors, to the ECU itself, to the all the core packs. The core packs have got separate connections for both. There are still a few of these wires and stuff that are still hanging around here that I pulled the car apart 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I can't remember how long ago now. But I don't know what they go to, so I'm going to have to track them down. But for the time being, the only thing left to connect up is just trying to find an ignition source of power. So I'm hoping that there's already something coming through up here. I've had a look at the wiring diagram, but it's a flow chart style, which is really difficult for me to understand what's actually got ignition and what doesn't. So I'm just going to go through now, connect the battery up, turn the ignition on and test it and see what actually has power. Okay, that's all wired up now. It's now got an ignition source, so it's got ignition, it's got full-time power. It should be fantastic and run perfectly. So that is done. So it's time to move over and start doing more of the fuel system and see if we can finish that off. All right, so now I'm under here in the black hole under the car, and I need to start working out what I'm going to do with the fuel system. So those of you who are watching previously, I set up these hard fuel lines to go through the center of the car. So they come out in the factory locations down here. So it looks like I still need to put some grommets on them. I need to cut them off and work out how to run my fuel lines up, mount up a fuel pressure regulator somewhere in the engine bay. But I also need to go through and just get rid of some of this stuff from under here that's just not supposed to be here anymore. I've got this old fuel lines, and just there's hoses and bits and pieces that I'm not going to be using. This, for example, throttle cable, that's not going to be used anymore. I need to see if I can get that out of the way. Just get rid of some of this stuff that is no longer necessary under the car. So first thing, let's do some tidying. I'll put this out to you guys out there. Does anyone have any idea what this very small hose would be for? It actually goes through into the body of the car, just where the handbrake cable goes through on this side. There's like just a little vent hose, it seems, that goes through. It's not connected to anything on this end. I have no idea what it actually is for, so if anybody knows what that is, just let me know in the comments. Thanks. Okay, so I managed to get the fittings on finally. It was a real pain to get in here to cut off these hard lines. The issue I had is that the regular tools, here's the regular tool from Raceworks that cuts them off. Basically it's a normal plumbing tool. It's got like a razor blade, circular razor blade here. You clamp it onto the pipe and then spin it all the way around. There is nowhere to get everything all the way around in here. And I didn't want to cut them off with a hacksaw because I didn't want filings all the way through my fuel lines. So what I ended up doing was, because it's nice soft aluminium line, I managed to use, I think it's the soft line cutters for the hoses, and I just used that. I managed to cut them off and then tidy them up. I did get some cotton tips in there, and I saw a couple of little filings in there. I managed to get them out. This is also going to have a filter on this side, so I'm not super worried about stuff in the fuel lines. If there is any little trace of it, the fuel filter should catch it before it goes anywhere near the engine. So, and then you've also got injectors, so it's just going to block up an injector. It's not actually going to go into the engine because All the other stuff's replaceable. The engine, I'm paranoid about. So, okay, so I've got my fittings in here now. So now it's the time to start fitting up some fuel lines themselves and see if I can work out how I'm going to get them up into the engine bay. All right, so this is mostly mounted up now. It's still relatively loose, but I thought it was a good time to talk about how I'm going to be running this fuel system. So the way I ran it in the past, particularly years ago, I had turbo cars that I used, and basically what the fuel pump would do is it would pump fuel up all the way up directly into the end of the fuel rail, and then you'd have a fuel pressure regulator at the end of the fuel rail, so sort of keeping the fuel rail at a certain pressure, and everything over that pressure was released off, and that went to the return and went back to the tank. Now, in this situation, we're actually doing it a different way. We're actually doing a deadhead system. So what that means is that all the fuel is going to come up to the fuel pressure regulator. The fuel pressure regulator is going to let out the correct pressure into the fuel rails, and the fuel rails will be blocked off at the ends, so it'll just have the fuel going into the fuel rails, keeping it at the pressure, and all the extra pressure is going out from here, from the fuel pressure regulator, out and back into the tank. So what that means is it just keeps the engine bay much neater, so I don't have to have fuel lines that loop all the way around the engine bay. All I need to do is just run a Y piece off of here, run one fuel line to one fuel rail on this side, one fuel line to one fuel rail on this side. There we go, we've got equal pressure on the fuel rails, and all the return goes straight from here, all at the back of the engine bay, nice and neat and tidy, and keeps it out of the way. So that is how I'm going to run it. So now it's time to go and make up some fittings. So I just need a fitting to run from here down through the back down here, down into the hard lines, and so that's the fuel in, and then the fuel out through the same way down to the other one. So let's start making some fittings. Okay, and for my fuel line, I'm going to be using the black Teflon braided 220 series fuel line for this car. They're all pretty straightforward. There's just slightly different ways of fitting up each of the different AN fittings. But in this one, I clamp the fitting in, just cut it off nice and square with a bit of tape using these cutters. Just re-square it up a bit because the end gets a little bit mushed when you cut it. There we go. Got the fitting over the end. Take the tape off. I just flare away the metal braid around the edge so you can get the olive over the nylon part down to level with the end of it. And just slide it onto the fitting like that and do it up. It's really, really simple. And preferably using the aluminium AN tools just saves you making a mess and makes them stay looking nice and shiny, nice and pretty and black. It doesn't scratch it off like like a normal shifter would. And there is one end done. They're pretty straightforward. So now I'm going to go and put it in the car, measure up exactly how long I want, trim it to length, and just make up my two different lines. Okay, and there we go. We've got the ECU, all the power up is all done, and the fuel pressure reg is all mounted and sitting in there nicely. All the fuel lines are going through to the fuel pump. So what I still need to do when I get the engine in is I need to do the fuel lines from this side of the regulator into the end of the fuel rails. But that's a pretty easy task. The main part is done now, so the fuel lines are in the engine bay. So when I come to actually removing the engine from the engine bay, it should be a reasonably simple task of undoing the one fuel fitting here and undoing these two clips here, this plug here, and we're disconnected. That's pretty much it, and 4 bolts. So it's really going to make it much easier to get the engine in and out. All right, well that is all I have time for today. So don't forget, if you're going to buy any Porsche parts of any type at all, compare prices first at PorschePartsByJeff.com. If you're enjoying the videos and you want to watch them a day early, join us on Patreon. The link's in the description. As always, I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.